And thank you for that intro. I appreciate you helping me with all of the virtual aspects of today's program. I would not be able to do it without you. So bear with me, folks, while I try to pull up my screen for you guys. Let me know if you guys can't see it there as I kind of start to dive on in. But again, thank you, Alexis, for queuing us up here. And thank you for the partners for Native Landscaping Planning Team for having me, and all of you as well for your interest in native seeds in your own spaces. As Alexis said, I'm Rachel Williams, the community and private land conservationist with the Missouri Department of Conservation. You saw one of my counterparts, I think a couple weeks ago at one of these P&L events. But for those that don't know the Missouri Department of Conservation, we are the state fish, forest, and wildlife agency for Missouri. We also focus on connecting folks to those resources as well. I've been with the Missouri Department of Conservation for about 6 years. The last 3 were in this current position where I provide technical assistance to schools and park staff and communities, as well as farmers, ranchers, and recreational landowners on management recommendations that benefit fish, forest, and wildlife on their own properties. So that kind of includes these seeded prairie reconstructions or pollinator plots that will be the focus of today's presentation. As Alexis said, it's cultivating native seeds in the landscape. The very wonderfully brilliant Dan Pearson helped me come up with that title, very eloquent title. But basically, we are learning about sowing and a growing. So seeds, all about how to plant seeds, grow them from seeds. But if we kind of went with this title, I think I would have had to have some banjos or keep a country accent going on. So I was like, okay, what else? What other title can we think of? So I was like, oh, I felt clever for this. I was like, the need for seed. I got excited about that one. And it kind of worked because the race car with its kind of exhaust out the back kind of looked like a milkweed seed with like the fluffy portion being the exhaust on the car. But as we know, or we're going to know today, planting natives from seed is not actually about the speed. And it's actually requiring some patience, especially compared to planting from plugs. So I stuck with the original title there, Cultivating Native Seeds in the Landscape. So we'll kind of kick it off with an overview of prairie community types, since this is kind of what we're mimicking when we are starting planting native seeds in our backyards. So kind of do a brief overview of the prairie community type here in Missouri. Talk a little bit about the diversity of seeds, or diverse seedy, when it comes to types of seeds, dormancies, dispersals, etc. Get into how to grow natives from seed in your own backyard. So site selection, site prep, seed sources, and actually getting down to sowing your seed. And then get into maintenance as well for those baby seedlings for the years to come. So I think I saw some folks were from out of state, so bear with me as I kind of go over and go Missouri centric here. But Missouri has, we've really lucked out and we have such beautiful, unique landscapes to explore in the state, from forests to glades to woodlands to caves and cliffs, and then to our beautifully diverse prairie systems as well. All these different natural community types have, of course, specific plant and animal species that live and interact with each other and have co-evolved with each other. Missouri prairies are the community type, again, that we're going to kind of focus in on today as we're recreating or mimicking those in our seeded landscapes. I think it's important to note that historically Missouri had about 15 million acres of prairie, and ironically now we have about 15 million acres of fescue in the state. So kind of a one-for-one trade-off there. Lawns represent the largest crop acreage in the United States as well. So not corn or soybeans that help feed us and act as wildlife refuge and wildlife food source, but our lawn, kind of similar to this picture here. And I'm sure most of you have seen lawns like this or park spaces like this, where we kind of like to call it recreational mowing. It's just basically what we like to call ecological desert spaces. it's interesting to see that folks kind of can see the importance and have interest of having forests and woodlands around their property and recognize those as important habitat types. But too many folks, whenever it's not forested, they think they have to mow it. So I think it's just kind of breaking through those social norms of having the really green cut grass, and explaining and informing folks of the importance of our other natural community types, like prairies. Prairies are the opposite of those ecological lawn deserts that we just saw. They have very diverse plant and animal species that call them home. The dominant plants on our native prairies are things like warm season grasses, Indian grass, big blue stem, little blue stem, side oats, grama, things like that, as well as an array of forbs or wildflowers. We have our white indigo here. Hopefully you guys can see my cursor, Indian paintbrush, prairie fringed orchid. We have big blue stem, mouse, rattlesnake master, prairie blazing star, butterfly milkweed, blue indigo, yellow cone flower, pale purple cone flower, larkspur, beard tongue, ashy sunflower, Mead's milkweed, side oats grama, and compass plant. So a wide variety of wildflower species we find on the prairies. And along with all those wildflower species, we have the wildlife species that depend on them in our grassland and prairie system. So birds like the eastern meadowlark, the bobolink, Henslow sparrow, the state endangered greater prairie chicken, upland sandpiper, reptiles and amphibians like our northern crawfish frog, which is a species of conservation concern as well. Plains hognose snake, which is probably extirpated from the state of Missouri. Eastern tiger salamander, six-lined race runner, larger mammals like bison, which are extirpated from the state, badger, which is vulnerable to extirpated from the state, and all sorts of fish and arthropods as well that depend on these systems for their survival. Many of those species, even if they aren't state or federally endangered, are still largely in decline compared to pre-settlement Missouri. One threat to those species in our prairies is habitat loss due to agriculture. This is happening for kind of two reasons. One is the lack of trees on our prairies made this conversion relatively easy. They didn't have to remove large amounts of trees to get to planting. And two, the soils underneath the prairie are very, very good and productive as well. The second process leading to the loss of prairie is conversion for development. Similar to farming, it's relatively easy to build on treeless landscapes with kind of gentle slopes. And in addition to prairies being destroyed, they're also just being degraded over time. Species such as fescue, Sericea lespedeza, musk thistles can readily invade our prairies, outcompeting the native plants and greatly reducing the wildlife value in turn. They can also be degraded by woody encroachment, kind of the natural succession. So to prevent further succession of a stand, it's recommended to limit the woody competition in a prairie site. Now that we kind of have our background of the threats to our Missouri prairie ecosystem and all the diversity of plants and animal species that are home, that call that home, we'll kind of switch gears a little bit and take a look at the abundance of diversity in prairie seeds themselves. So from tiny dust-like seeds on the tip of your finger that are light enough for the wind to carry, to large nuts that are packed with food and energy to jumpstart the growth of that plant. Each are adapted for how the parent plant lives and reproduces and spreads. Seed dispersal is one of the reasons seeds are so diverse in their shape and size and weight and appendages. It's kind of the mechanism by which plants establish new individuals in different locations away from that parent plant. That's crucial for minimizing competition among seedlings for light and moisture, soil nutrients, and optimizing their chances for survival by placing them in environments that offer better growing conditions away from that parent plant. All these different mechanisms of dispersal kind of reminded me of the Avatar, kind of like master of wind, water, fire. So seed dispersal is like that, where it's wind, water, animals, explosive dispersal, gravity dispersal, and seeds can be the master of both, as we'll kind of get into here. Wind dispersal. So seeds from plants like dandelions or cottonwood trees or milkweed seeds that you can kind of think about, like this one over here, are light and have feathery like bristles that can be carried long distances by the wind. Or if you want to think of seeds like the winged seeds or helicopter seeds of maple trees that also are carried by the wind, wind dispersal allows for these seeds to reach all kinds of places, large distances, increasing their chances that they land in a suitable place and can grow and reproduce there. Water dispersal, so seeds with kind of hard coatings with air inside can allow them to float down our streams and rivers. So one thing that's easy to think of is like a coconut traveling out into the ocean, washing up on a new shore somewhere. Or for things in Missouri, it's cattails, cottonwoods, sycamores. These all have examples of seeds that have long, slender hairs that allow them to either float in the water and be dispersed that way or dispersed by wind as well. Animal dispersal. A large population of seeds will be dispersed by animals. One way animals or us humans disperse seeds are like pictured here, the beggar's ticks or stick tights, things from the Biden's genus. I'm sure everybody that's been out hiking has gotten something like this stuck to their pants before, their hiking boots. These seeds have little hooks or barbs that catch onto an animal's fur, feathers, or skin, and then fall off later as they've been transported through the ecosystem. Also dispersed via animals is when an animal eats the fruit of a plant. They don't digest those seeds. They walk around and their droppings are the landing home for these seeds in another life. Or something like a pawpaw where the seeds are a little bit larger. They might be carried off by a critter. The fruit's eaten, but the seeds are discarded, again, where that critter decided to have lunch for the day. And they're left to grow in that location. Explosive seed dispersal, this sounds fun. It's basically a lot of our legume family where they can be explosive when they kind of split along the edge and kind of fling the seeds out is the best way to describe it. Or something like a wild geranium here pictured where it kind of curls up at the bottom and whenever it kind of dries up, it gets tight and eventually it will fling the seeds several feet. As kind of the explosive mechanism that wild geranium has. I'd also say milkweeds are similar to this explosive pattern. Lastly, gravity. This one likely affects all of our seeds for their dispersal at one point or another, especially our larger, heavier seeds like nuts and fruits. And some may be even adapted to roll a greater distance after gravity allows them to fall from their original parent plant, kind of like Osage oranges. Gravity really affects Osage oranges. Those things are heavy. So those were kind of all the dispersal mechanisms. Now we'll kind of get into the diversity of seeds as it comes to kind of different categories and their dormancies. One type of seed is going to be our native worm season grass seed. This is going to be things like switchgrass, eastern gamagrass, big and little blue stem, Indian grass. For switchgrass and eastern gamagrass, switchgrass is the one pictured here in the background. It has really high purity. You can tell it's very smooth on the outside of the seed. It's very free flowing through different seeding mechanisms. So it's one of the easier ones to seed versus big and little blue stem and Indian grass. They typically have a lower purity and a lot of this extra stuff. So on the left-hand side for this bearded seed, you can see it's very fluffy. It has those appendages. It goes so far that there's so much extra stuff that you can actually have your seed vendor do a process called debearding the seed. That way you can kind of run through different seeders a little bit more effectively that way. Less so important whenever you're broadcasting your seed by hand, which is what I'm going to be recommending to you guys whenever you implement your smaller scale seeded projects. But definitely something to consider, just the variance there and two different species in the native warm season grass category. But all native warm season grasses, we'll kind of go into dormancy a little bit. Seed dormancy is basically seed hibernation. They're waiting to germinate until favorable environmental conditions occur. So the seed has to have the right temperature, the right amount of water, light, etc. This adaptation ensures that seeds don't try to germinate too early whenever there isn't suitable conditions ecologically. That way they just increase their chances of survival over time. But dormancy is really important to think about when you're trying to think of the best time of year to seed to ensure germination is favorable. It's been found that both dormant seedings, so kind of in the winter months, and spring seedings both produce successful native warm season grass stands, but spring seedings are actually favored using a drill. Again, so it's a little bit different whenever you guys are doing it at home, which we'll talk more about, but just a little bit of variability there. This is kind of a table that you'll see reoccurring. So you can see down here, warm season grasses, acceptable planting dates versus warm season grasses, acceptable planting dates for Southern Missouri. So Northern Missouri versus Southern Missouri for warm season grasses. So here in St. Louis is going to be actually a southern county, and the acceptable seeding dates for native warm season grasses are going to be either in the spring between March 1st and June 15th, or dormant seeding December 1st through February 29th. So a little bit of variance there that we'll kind of come back to this table a couple times throughout. Native cool season grasses, this is going to be your wild rye. So Canada wild rye and Virginia wild rye. These are becoming a little bit more popular, especially in kind of our woodland seedings or seedings to address erosion. But they can also be integrated into our prairie seedings as well. They are a cool season grass, as mentioned, so they bloom later in the year, around August or October, kind of thriving in that cool weather window. Similar to native warm season grasses, where they have been shown to have additional success in spring seedings, but they can also be done in the dormant seeding. So very similar to our native warm seasons there. And here is the Southern Missouri seeding dates. So spring planting, March 1st through May 15th, dormant seeding, December 16th through February 29th, again for Southern Missouri, which includes St. Louis. Sedges. I can't say that I know too much about sedges. As you can tell from just my Carrick species notation down there, there's a lot of different kinds of sedges. They're very hard to tell apart sometimes. And we don't use them all that often. They're more so common in kind of our riparian woodland seedings rather than our prairie seedings. But they also require a cold, moist stratification process. So best for dormant seedings, or to have your seed vendor artificially stratify your seed before you purchase from them. And that's very similar to our forbs and wildflowers. Wildflowers, again, many shapes, sizes, colors, etc. So you can see from this picture of Rick from one of our conservation areas, he is sorting all the seed that he collected by hand on that conservation area. So you can imagine, you can kind of see little sticks and leaves in here. So we'll talk more about your seed purity. And that basically is going to say, whenever you're thinking of a pound of seed, is it a pound of seed that has this extra stuff in it? Or is it a pound of seed that is pure live seed? It's just the seed that is going to germinate whenever you put it in the ground. So just wanted to note that in the background here. But for forb dormancy, as I mentioned kind of with the sedges, many forb species require a 30 to 90 day cold, moist stratification process before they germinate. The easiest way to achieve that necessary stratification time is with a dormant seeding. So wildflowers can be drilled after those dates, but it isn't recommended, as you can kind of set yourself back not having achieved that cold moist stratification. So until they go through that process the following year, they won't germinate for you. However, some seed dealers can put your seeds through that process in their shops prior to you picking up the seed. Then you're good to go. So I just had a landowner do this and get their seed in the ground last week. It was a native warm season grass and wildflower seeding, but they had the seed vendor cold moist stratify the seed prior to them drilling it. So they are good to go. That seed will germinate then this year since they've already gone through that stratification process in-house at the seed dealer. So a couple ways to do it, but just kind of keeping in mind what types of seed need that stratification process. Is it just as cold stratification, cold dry? Is it cold moist? Different kind of seeds require different processes. Again, you can see here, Forbes are listening with the warm season grasses. Southern Missouri, again, same dates as those warm season grasses. If you're doing a spring planting, it's required to drill the seed rather than broadcast the seed. Dormant, you could do either or, but again, for a lot of your guys' smaller scale projects, we're going to be recommending that you hand broadcast. So you're kind of looking again at those dormant seeding dates. And as I mentioned, all the extra fluff that Rick had here. This is, sorry, kind of a blurry picture, but a seed tag from a seed dealer. And it just has all this additional information on it that you might want to take a peek at or have somebody take a peek at prior to you purchasing. It's going to have the PLS amounts, so that's the pure live seed. Again, that's going to just be the seed that's going to be germinating for you, not the extra fluff that you see on the ground in Rick's shop here. You can look at purity, germination rates, make sure that there's no weed seed incorporated. That's at 0. You don't want to have any noxious weeds that could be included in your seed. And this is all done through testing at the seed vendors facility. So just something to look at. Keep this seed tag, reference it, have somebody check it over if you are looking to purchase seed in the future. So the great thing about these prairie reconstructions or pollinator plots is that they allow for all different types of landowners to have the opportunity to contribute to wildlife habitat on their own property. These photos actually all came from my supervisor's home in Troy. He has about 3 acres of property that the previous owner mowed most of it for. So as you can imagine, somebody that works for the Department of Conservation came in, saw this recreational mowing, and immediately started to convert the lawn into beautiful habitats like these. And he kind of comments about how on kind of a quiet summer day, you can kind of walk by some of these plots and just hear the humming of bees and insects flying around in there. He's seen indigo buntings, field sparrows, blue grosbeaks, goldfinches, white-eyed vireos, common yellowthroats, and all sorts of different wildlife frequenting these plantings on a regular basis. So it just really demonstrates that almost anybody can help out, no matter how big or small their property is. Any sort of idle land that isn't being used for a specific purpose and doesn't have to be mowed all summer long can be managed to provide habitat for pollinators and other wildlife species. Even a pollinator garden a couple hundred square feet in size can help. We have one here at the Howard Wood Urban Outreach Office, just north of Tower Grove Park, where we just converted out in front of our parking lot a very small square foot project, and we've seen monarch butterflies using it. We've seen monarch caterpillars, we've seen rabbits, all sorts of things, even just in that small urban area. So it's nice that there's a lot of opportunities for folks to contribute to these. So actually getting into the implementation process, we'll discuss how you can implement something like this in your own yard, again, from seed, kind of focusing on that process and talking about where to plant, how to prep the site to plant, where to get the seeds, how to seed, and the management of those sites as well. So for site selection, it's important to kind of map the area that you are considering converting to our natives. Note if it's shady versus sunny, kind of aiming for a sun to mostly sun area of your yard if you're planting our prairie loving plants. Select an area that doesn't get perhaps a lot of foot traffic through it, an area where you can tolerate a bit taller, less manicured, like plot. Uh, Also take into consideration the current vegetation that's there, whether it's a pretty clean lawn that's mostly fescue, or if it has some clover or other weed seed in there that may need to be treated with a broadleaf selective herbicide. Or if you have something that's a little bit harder to deal with, like Sericea lespedeza, one of our non-native invasive species, where it would require multiple years of site prep before it's ready to be seeded. So kind of making a list of the vegetation that's currently there for the site conditions, and then creating a schedule to keep you on track based on your findings. I really like these from the chapter on reconstructing a tall grass prairie from Shaw Nature Reserve and other partners. It kind of lays it out just very briefly on, okay, what should I be doing spring, summer, fall, early winter, to kind of keep you on track for your planting. Site prep. This is one of the most important parts of your seeding, is going to be prepping the site to make sure that you give your seedlings the best possible chance at survival, and limit the competition that they are up against in regards to weed seed, because that is the most likely reason for failed plantings, is usually the site prep wasn't done to the extent that it should have been done prior to planting, because folks get, of course, excited to start the process, and I don't blame them, but it really requires good upfront site prep. So key is to eliminate and reduce competing vegetation. This can be done with herbicide sprayings, tarping, sod removal on these kind of small scale projects. I've always been one that recommends herbicide sprayings if folks are comfortable. At least 2, if not 3, non-selective herbicide applications, something like glyphosate, in the spring, summer, fall, prior to your winter dormant seeding. Always follow the label when you are using herbicide, wear your proper PPE. The label is the law, and that's going to have all the necessary information on timing, target species, etc. on the back of your bottle there. As for tarping, this method is going to be putting clear plastic over mowed vegetation, and this essentially is allowing the sunlight in and will create the heat that is needed to kill off the existing vegetation. So if you can manage to kind of babysit your tarp in kind of windy conditions and all sorts of kind of atmospheric conditions, then this might be a possible option for you to get the site prep done that you need. Another would be removing the sod, whether by hand or with specialized tools. This is going to be removing the first few inches of roots and soil, exposing the underlying soil beneath, ready for you to plant. Once existing vegetation is killed, the ground should not be tilled or disced up. This prevents the weed seeds from being kind of turned up to the surface and having additional competition that you were trying to manage for. So try not to disturb the soil and kind of dig deep and reach for more weed seeds beneath the surface if you can. The goal is to get at least 50% bare ground, especially whenever you guys are going to be dormant broadcasting. So whenever you broadcast the seed, you'll want at least 50% bare ground. Having some dead vegetation in place is nice over winter, only if it's a few inches high. Otherwise, you should probably cut it. And then just, again, be sure to treat the site, whether with a rake or something like that, prior to seeding, to ensure that there's not competing vegetation that won't allow the seed to drop onto the soil and make good seed to soil contact. In general, fertilizer is not needed for these sites. Okay, on to what seeds to actually plant. We have some really good seed vendors in the state that can help you in this process. You can find them in this Grow Native resource guide. They have all sorts of suppliers in there that you can search through. Most of the guidelines that I'll be running through in this list, the Missouri Department of Conservation uses on our own projects. We recommend landowners and community partners use it on their projects. It comes from the Natural Resource Conservation Services Wildlife Planting Practice Standards. But it's a great guide to ensure that whenever you guys are using it on your own properties, you have a diverse, wildlife-friendly mix of seeds. So the first thing is having a seed mix that has a minimum of 15 pure life seeds per square foot and a maximum of 30 pure life seeds per square foot. That pure life seeds per square foot can be increased in areas where you think erosion might be an issue or concentrated flow areas are a concern. But research has found kind of after that 30 mark, you're starting to get additional seed that actually isn't going to have room to germinate in those plots. So you're kind of wasting your money at that point to add and bulk up your mix because you're not going to see the germination results. There's not room for those seedlings there. So somewhere between 15 and 30 pure life seeds per square foot. You're going to want a minimum of 20 species of wildflowers. The higher the diversity is better, with no single species exceeding 10% of the mix, and that annual biannuals combined account for no more than 10% of the mix. So as far as that 10 species go, you can go all the way up to 50, 60 plus species. Just something to keep in mind is that the dollar amount for your seed mix is going to increase as you kind of try to hit some of those rare or harder to collect seeds from your dealers. Those are going to be the ones that cost a little bit more. So there's just something to keep in mind there. Your seed mix should have at least 3 species in each bloom period. So at least 3 species blooming in spring, 3 in summer, and 3 in fall. This just ensures that there's food resources out there for our pollinating friends at all different times of the year. Another kind of component of this is that your native grasses should not make up more than 25% of the mix. Grasses aren't actually required in kind of our seed specs that we work off of unless erosion or there's like a slope concern. Then the benefit of grasses is to kind of hold some more soil in place. Otherwise, you can do all wildflowers, but the benefit of adding grasses is that they do provide a different kind of habitat structure. They have a different seed head that can attract different birds and things. And if you have a space that's large enough that you think you might eventually use prescribed fire to manage the landscape, native grasses can help carry the fire through that plot during the maintenance stage. So some considerations if you're thinking about adding native grasses or not. An added bonus, if you're interested in attracting monarchs, is that you should have at least 3% milkweed species. 2/3 of that we recommend being common milkweed, and the remaining third either be butterfly milkweed on well-drained sites or swamp milkweed in wetter sites. This is also, there's also a list of preferred monarch forbs to consider that I'll flash up here real quick. This isn't the extensive list, but this is what you can search for on Natural Resource Conservation Services website. Table 1, approved forbs for monarchs, if you're really trying to target those in your seeding. Okay, moving on to sowing or the act of seeding. Some notes to keep in mind. Dormant seeding is going to be the best option for your wildflowers. We've kind of mentioned this, that native warm season grasses usually prefer that seed timing, but regardless, for these small sites in your guys' backyards, native warm season grasses are going to do just fine being seeded at the same time as your wildflowers. So everything can be seeded and mixed in together for a dormant seeding. Again, this is usually kind of the December to February timeframe, depending on northern or southern Missouri. Many of those forbs require that 30 to 90 days of the cold moist stratification. So that's why we seed during this time to make sure we hit that and they're ready to germinate for us that year. For small scale projects, usually broadcasting by hand is best. I've done this with seedings with grade school kiddos. It was at a golf course. And they each had their own kitty litter bucket full of seed, and we kind of spaced them out in the best of a grid pattern that we could. And they just had to blast dispersing the seed. So kind of flashback to our dispersal methods. we were, in this case, using animal dispersal or elementary kid dispersal, and then wind dispersal as they were tossing the seed left and right, and then gravity dispersal as it then fell to the ground. So kind of hitting our mark on all those different dispersal mechanisms that we were talking about then at the beginning. It's also really nice if you can time it to seed before or after a snowfall. After a snowfall is awesome because, as you can see from the top photo of this little girl seeding in her backyard, you can actually see the seed laying on the surface, so you can kind of keep track of where you've been or where you still need to seed. But after or before a snow allows for the seed to be kind of worked back into the soil at the proper level, just further ensuring that the majority of your seed is at the proper planting depths before it starts to germinate in that coming spring. So it's great if you can time it out with a snowfall. Lastly, you should, whenever you're broadcasting the seed, use a carrier. So sawdust, pelletized lime, sand, rice hulls, kitty litter, something that will allow for a more even distribution by bulking up your seed mix. Because as we saw in those pictures, there's these itty bitty seeds. So if you can kind of bulk it up with something, with a carrier, that can allow for better dispersal. Because you can imagine on some of these smaller planting sites, you might only get a little packet of seeds. So it's nice to bulk it up and better distribute that way. Lastly, maintenance. Maintenance is critical to the success of your planting. This is especially true in the first year. So competing vegetation is going to be needed to be controlled. And the easiest way to do this is by what we call maintenance mowings. Research out of Iowa showed that plots where mowing was used to control competing vegetation had a greater species diversity and abundance than the non-mowed plots. And this was still the case. The follow-up study conducted the same plots like 10 years later, and all the same management was done aside from those maintenance mowings the first year, and the diversity still ranked out in the one that was maintenance mowed versus the one that didn't have those maintenance mows to control the competing vegetation. So really, really important aspect of your guys' seedings. So you should plan to mow or weed eat your locations depending again on the size, and if you have a lawnmower that can raise the deck to about 3 to 6 inches of height the first year. So this is going to require multiple mowings. Basically, whenever the competing vegetation is starting to shade out the ground cover, so whenever the competing weeds get to about 12 inches, you'll want to mow or weed eat and knock it back down to 3 or 6 inches high. And you'll want to do this as frequently as needed throughout that first growing season, and discontinue after the seedlings go dormant. The frequent mowings, we've never really seen a problem with frequent mowings and mowing too much. It's really just if you mow too short. Sometimes it can stimulate things like crabgrass if you mow too short. So just try to hit that 3 to 6 inch height the first year. And just keeping in mind that this was not the need for seed presentation. It takes a while. The first year, everybody's heard that they sleep. The second year, they creep. And the third year, they leap. So after kind of maintaining the site with maintenance mowings the first and second year, you will be moving on to your third year, and you might want to consider some type of disturbance. So for your guys' backyard plots, this could be something like herbicide sprayings. You could target your grass species if they're getting a little bit out of control or bullying your wildflower species a little too much. You can do a grass selective herbicide application to try to knock back those grasses, promote your wildflowers a little bit more. Or if it's getting really dense and thick, you might consider kind of doing strip mowings or even strip mowings with herbicide applications as well, just allowing a new space for other wildflowers to take advantage of and kind of set back that succession. If you guys have the possibility to do some burning, depending on the location of the plot, that's what we recommend, of course, for our larger scale projects. This is going to eliminate that thatch layer that builds up over the years, which is a really great benefit of those burns. They can also stimulate our target species or set back target species depending on the timing of year. If that's not possible, another option is simply weeding by hand in your guys' smaller plots. Really fine tuning and targeting different species and problem species within your guys' plantings. So maintenance is definitely critical to your guys' success. And luckily, with these small scale projects, it's something that you see looking out your back window while you're having coffee, and it can't slip away from you as much as some of the farmers where it's off the property and they don't see the location as much. So you guys can kind of baby these plantings a little bit more. And with that, I think that Alexis said she was going to be monitoring the chat for me. So if we have a couple questions, I think we have time to do so.